I just expect so much of Joe Biden right now. I think he has to prove to the Palestinian people that working with Netanyahu is not the way to go, and that he has to get back with the international community and allow the ICC to do its job. He has to condemn and call on the withdrawal of recognition of the settlements as Israel. They are illegal on Palestinian lands. He has to, in my opinion, I mean, we have a long list, but also if he really wants to go back to the status quo, the Obama era status quo, which is not ideal, he still has to move back the embassy to Tel Aviv, which we know he won't, but still, it's really important for the Palestinians. And it's important to listen to the Palestinian people. Enough is enough when it comes to speaking on our behalf. Enough is enough for making decisions on our behalf.
Welcome to the Mondo Weiss podcast. At Mondo Weiss, we cover the movements, activists, and policymakers who affect the struggle for freedom in Palestine. I'm Dave Reed. Just after the U.S. election in November of last year, our U.S. politics correspondent Michael Arria spoke to Zeina Ashrawi Hutchison about the outcome and what it means for Palestinian-Americans engaging with the U.S. political system. Zeina is a Palestinian-American activist and DNC delegate from Virginia.
I guess first, just off the bat, if you wanted to, before we get to the questions, I'm just wondering in terms of the election, obviously with Biden winning, despite the fact that Trump hasn't conceded, obviously Biden won, but there wasn't this kind of colossal blue wave that many people predicted. And I'm just wondering if anything from the results kind of stood out to you within the context of the issues that you work on and write about.
The results were glaring, actually. They were a lot more revealing in the magnitude of the evenness of the votes, at least to start with. But now, I mean, the gap is widening. But it was very revealing because it wasn't just the Palestinians and the Arabs that were kind of like, oh, we don't have a choice. This is we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And our options are so limited. And slowly and surely, we started to realize that all of this sort of literally the blue wave that we were promised was never coming. And it was all of the progress and the win that was expected on the backs of the minorities, on the backs of the Black Americans, on the backs of the Latinx, on the Palestinians and Arabs to vote. We were told to vote no matter what against Trump. And many of the minorities voted against Trump. Very few minorities that I know or progressives voted for Biden. I mean, voted for Biden, but not, substantively for Biden. I mean, what was glaring was the fact that they needed us and they just wouldn't admit it. They threw the progressive movement under the bus at every single chance they got during the campaign and during the debates. They marginalized minority causes like racial justice reform, as well as Palestinian, of course, the issue of Palestinian rights and the occupation, and pacified us on many, many fronts, whether it's during the platform process or afterwards. Now that the dust has settled, you kind of look around and realize that we're more powerful than we thought we were. Our voice is needed as progressives and as Palestinians. And the way to do it is, if anything, it united a front to show the Democratic Party that the base can carry the party, not just the few elites on top. So now it's the Democratic Party that has a lot to sort of digest and to work with. Do they want to stay the course that they're working on now and alienate and gatekeep, or do they want to actually give the progressive movement and the left a voice in the party?
The last time we kind of chatted over email, it was the midst of the fight over the Democratic platform, this kind of battle to more inclusion of Palestinian issues, Palestinian rights. You co-wrote a piece at the Washington Post shortly after that, and the headline declared that the platform had betrayed Palestinians. I'm wondering kind of where you think the political energy that was generated around the platform, where is the place for it to be focused now, post-election?
like I was saying, the revealing aspect of this post-election thing directly correlates with the platform itself, because the fight on the platform was over very specific issues. And we see the continuation and the manifestation of the politics of it on the ground currently. For example, to show the differences between sort of the Trump era and the Biden era, when what we were working on then and what we hope to be working on now for Palestine. There isn't much difference. The fight before with the prospective Biden campaign was on, for example, the glaring one is occupation. Not accepting to use the word occupation in the Democratic Party platform is not by accident. And he interjected on that, as you very well know, he interjected and removed it or refused for it to be added personally. Now, and what makes sense now is the fact that when Trump currently annexed the West Bank and said, you know what, settlements are legal, this is exactly denying the existence of the occupation on the ground. To deny the existence of the occupation means you're legalizing settlements. It means you're legalizing the wall. It means you're legalizing the oppression of the Palestinian people within the 1967 borders. It means that the International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction to investigate or try Israel for war crimes. And so even though the Trump administration actually flat out said, no, settlements are not illegal, denying the word occupation on the platform is almost equivalent to that. And essentially what the Democrats have done over the years is what Trump has been doing, what Trump did now in a much shorter span of time, but sort of over decades. Doing it quietly under the table. For example, Biden would never say, I'm against Israeli annexation of land. He would say, I'm against further annexation of land. So anything before, all the settlements before, all the annexation of land before, that is fine, as long as they don't keep taking land. Now, in terms of fighting for the cause itself and how we're going to fix this as Palestinians, or how we're going to deal with the Biden administration on this. Actually, I think the Biden administration is in a really, really tough position right now, because aligning with the Netanyahu administration is extremely detrimental on human rights issues, on civil rights issues. The Netanyahu government is aligned with Trump on so many levels. And so if Biden wants to put this administration in alignment with a Netanyahu-led Israeli government, then he is risking a huge part of his base and a huge part of the Democratic Party's integrity. In fact, not a huge part, the Democratic Party's integrity. When it comes to our standing in the world, or if we want to claim that we are leaders in human rights, or if we're going to boast on, working on our own racial justice reform here, but accepting an exclusively Jewish state in Israel. I mean, Biden really, really has to decide what he wants to do. But I think he's in a tough place with Israel now, because the Trump administration delivered what Biden had promised to deliver to Israel. That's what I saw from the platform, my work on the platform. So for me as a Palestinian, when I looked at the platform committee, when you and I spoke earlier, I was floored. I was flabbergasted. I didn't understand why they didn't want to include equal rights. I didn't understand why, the Jewishness of the state. I didn't understand why there were specific things written in there. But those were promises. We knew for a fact that the Israeli lobby was directly involved with the right drafting of the platform. And we knew that the Biden administration has a love affair with Israel for decades. I mean, Biden himself declared Zionist. I mean, I don't want to keep repeating that, but he is a declared self-described Zionist. Who champions the $38 billion to Israel proudly on the platform. But he also, not adding the occupation, was basically a green light for Israel. I promise you, I will not interfere in the further annexation of land. I will maybe slap you on the wrist for it, but on paper, I will never admit that they're illegal. I mean, the direct annexation of land or conditioning of aid, he refused completely. He refused to do conditioning of aid to obviously Trump, that was never even an issue, but with Biden himself, neither on human rights nor on on nothing. I mean, there was no conditioning of aid. And that was a promise that he did then as a sort of precursor to this. But also, I think the biggest loss for Biden that Trump sort of played on the Biden card here and took it from him was the normalization issue, which has been the center of the Biden-Trump situation here for Palestinians. So in the Biden platform, he specifically said one of the promises is that he will further and continue to help Israel normalize with its neighboring countries. And I feel like Trump took that away from him in a snap of a finger. And now Israel has Biden and Trump saying, so now all your promises were delivered by Trump before he left office. What else do you have to give me now to deliver for the Israeli lobby to deliver to your party? And so the fear is that they're either going to go overboard and deliver Palestine, which they have been, but slowly. When Republicans are in or certain presidents are in, it goes in full speed and in your face, and they get things, they blatantly steal and kill. Whereas with other administrations like the Obama and other administrations, it goes under the table. Language is chosen specifically. Everything is calculated. But yeah, so now it's terrifying for me as a Palestinian, because I look at the Biden administration before all of this, before the normalization, before the annexation, for the legalization of the annexation, before moving the embassy really officially and having a big conversation about it. And we were worried. Now it's gone into overdrive. But at the same time, there are huge expectations from the Palestinians for Biden. If he truly wants to stand by his word that he does support rights for the Palestinians, that he sees both Palestinians and Israelis as equal, or he didn't say equal, but he sees us as having equal worth or whatever. And he does condone further annexation. He needs to stand up and speak up. He needs to actually say something, and not just say something, but do something, because facts on the ground are changing. And he's not going to return the embassy back to Tel Aviv. He already said that. Restoring aid to the Palestinians is conditional. Normalization has already happened. So there's no the Palestinians don't have the Arab support behind them. We expect that if he can't deliver on the major moves that Trump has done, then he has to, at the very least, speak up against them. He has to speak up. The Arab and Palestinian community in the United States mobilized, got the votes. You have people and Muslim communities who all think of Palestine as a priority in their political agenda. They mobilized, they knocked doors, they made phone calls, they knowing full well the ramifications of a Biden administration, mobilized and got him elected. Without Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and others in our community, I seriously doubt that he would have been. So at this point, we're cashing in. And at this point, cashing in means we're no longer just a few pockets of Arab American and Muslim American communities here and there that aren't able to organize and mobilize. We are capable, we are strong, we are knowledgeable, and we have the power in the uniting power of the Palestinian cause. It unites people because it's based on justice, it's based on fairness, it's based on freedom, it's based on your basic human dignity, and it shouldn't be divisive. We can get the votes out, we can mobilize people, and now they know it. So it's up to the Biden campaign and future administrations as well, and candidates on all levels of the spectrum to actually have the courage to stand up and do what's right, and realize that you can align with the Palestinian people based on rights and still make it in politics, because that's the right thing to do. It's not, as a Palestinian, I work diligently against the military-industrial complex. I want to get money out of politics, because those are the things that influence integrity in politics. Those are the things that put corporations ahead of people. Biden and this administration know it, because he wouldn't have won without us.
I wanted to just kind of piggybacking off that. There's this debate going on, or battle, whatever you want to say, within the Democratic Party at the moment, which was kind of predictable. I feel like if, there was a huge blue wave, it would have said, this proves that we have to move to the center. And because they lost seats now, there's an attempt to kind of blame the left flank of the party. When that gets covered or people talk about it, and, we've seen Rashida Tlaib and AOC and Bernie and these people kind of hit back at that kind of analysis. They tend to bring up things like the Green New Deal or Medicare for all. They say, incumbents who supported these things weren't defeated. Less so is kind of brought up the issues that you bring up, like conditioning aid to Israel. There's going to be, like a few more people or a handful more people in Congress in January who support conditioning aid. There was that letter the other day signed by 41 Democrats, I think, demanding answers about the demolition of a village. Can you talk about, you're a delegate to the DNC, a national delegate. Can you talk about kind of the state of the party going forward and how you kind of perceive that fault line and just kind of like where it's at, how much headway is being made and kind of what comes next when it comes to that? Do you think there is going to be, or do you see it formulating already, a kind of deeper showdown over the issue of, say, conditioning aid?
Yes, I do. And I think it's based on principle, not based on politics. And that's the tough part here. There's two aspects to this, I feel, for the Palestinian, the conditioning aid in general and the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Number one is that the president has authority to do things without Congress when it comes to foreign policy. So there's quite a bit that we can't control when it comes to how much we can affect. But in my personal perspective, and strictly speaking about the Palestine issue and conditioning aid and the annexation, change in the party as it relates to that has to start from the state level. It is impossible to get people elected from the state and then to send, to federal office without holding them accountable and questioning their moral compass, if you will, or their understanding and or support of the issues that relate to Palestinian rights. So once they get to Congress, it's a lot harder to influence these candidates. So in my perspective, the Palestinian-American communities and the Muslim communities or any person of conscience or an ally, it is important that we focus on people before they get elected, discuss the issues, have an open conversation about it, and encourage them to speak up and show them that our community is willing to mobilize and willing to stand behind them. Because we saw many times, and this goes back to the power of the party and the lobbying, we saw in this election, one of the glaring things actually, and proudly I say, is that many of the people elected to office in this cycle were not the most funded. They did not get the most amount of money to win. So that gives me a lot of hope, because that means that money doesn't control everything. I mean, it controls most of the elections, but it doesn't control everything. I mean, people are realizing this, and people are standing up on principle and running for office on principle. So if the Democratic Party as a whole wants to listen to the base, wants to incorporate more of the progressive voices into the party as a whole, we as activists and as a DNC delegate have to be involved from the very, very beginning and see it and grow with it. The leadership now, there's absolutely no moving them on the substance, I feel. And I feel we can make minute changes here and there, but ultimately there has to be a massive shift from the bottom up. As a whole, for the progressive movement and how, not just on Palestine, but as a whole, it is a dangerous, dangerous time for the Democratic Party, because they are having to make decisions that could cost the party power. I mean, it could cost them elections, it could cost them influence, it could change the whole discourse, the political discourse. Because the two campaigns that Bernie ran, he may have lost, but he galvanized people. He brought people together. He educated people on substance. He gave people options to fight for things, and not just by having money, by learning what it takes to move votes or to influence politicians or to even question candidates, and that it was okay to dissent. It was okay to say no. And that's the beauty of the progressive movement within the Democratic Party now, is that they're telling them to their face, we're saying, no, we disagree with you, and we are part of this Democratic Party. We are not some fringe group on the side that you can continuously alienate. We are powerful. We are within the Democratic Party, and we have every right to speak up and dissent when we feel there is a need to. I think it's beautiful. What we're seeing, I think it's not going to be easy going forward, but I think in due time, because the leadership of the party is a whole generation that needs to be replaced. It's not just ideologically, it's just a whole generation. It's the way of thinking, it's a way of life, it's the understanding of the issues. These people haven't lived with working class families. Most of the elected officials are filthy rich, working with corporations, don't see the day-to-day life of the average American. But most of the activists are the average American. Slowly but surely, this is catching up. And they're so out of touch. This could very well be either a complete shift in the Democratic Party to the more progressive side, or the complete dismantlement of the structure as we see it right now.
Despite all the horrors of Trump, I feel like he has engaged some people and brought them to politics. Also, the BLM movement, obviously, this year brought people into it who previously not. I'm just wondering, kind of, when it comes to something like foreign policy, it just seems like such a thing that, like a normal everyday person who goes to work doesn't have an impact over, even less so than maybe domestic issues. I saw you tweeting the other day about the Virginia-Israel Advisory Board. I don't know if people realize that this kind of stuff is going on in their own communities. And I'm just kind of wondering if you could speak to that type of activism. It's something that we cover a lot. What would you say to somebody who cares about politics, reads about Palestine, Yemen, Syria, all these things, is concerned about it, but doesn't see the path to, push Biden left, or doesn't feel like they really have a voice in this? What would you say to somebody who had that view? And how would you convince them that they can do things potentially locally that might have this bigger impact that you're talking about in the long run?
First of all, I don't see the Israel-Palestine issue as a foreign policy issue, even though realistically, on paper it is, and that's how it's thought of because of the physical sort of location of the place. But really, $38 billion of U.S. tax money goes to Israel, 10 million every day. That is when we here in America are fighting to cancel student debt, when we are fighting to get Medicare for all or single-payer healthcare. We are fighting for environmental, causes. We are fighting for LGBTQIA rights. And of course, the most important one, or not most important, but the heart of the American struggle here in America is racial justice reform. We have to end abolishing the police, that whole movement. We have to invest in American interest. And so when that much money from our tax money is going to invest in single-payer healthcare in Israel, when here people are in debt for stepping in the hospital for 10 minutes, is extremely concerning and affects every single American, no matter what, where you are in society. Also, integrating a foreign government within your local government, within the Virginia legislature. This is not just any organization. This affects policy. This affects politics. This takes state taxes. This takes, if you're talking about business, they're taking away contracts from local businesses to give to Israeli companies. They are investing in the prosperity of Israel more than they are investing in the health and sustainability of their own state. What I tell people around me is that Palestine and Israel issue is not necessarily a foreign policy issue. It is a human issue. It's a matter of justice and dignity. We're not asking for much. We are just asking for our right to live freely. We are just asking for equality. We are just asking for, the basics. And it hurts when it becomes sort of an Israeli arm in my own. So I'm paying taxes, federal taxes to Israel. I'm also paying state taxes to Israel. And so is my neighbor. Once they understand the magnitude of investment that we have as Virginians and as Americans, Virginians in particular, but Americans as a whole, it becomes the realization that we really don't control as much. It's not as much foreign policy as we think it is. It's very much domestic policy. You have the Israeli lobby also influences and makes deals. We saw that with the platform committee, influences and makes deals on votes. If you vote for Medicare for all, or if you downvote Medicare for all, you'll upvote something else. They make deals on these things for Palestinian rights. They make deals on these things for a reason, because they know that it impacts local politics, and it impacts local politicians as well. It's not just local politics. I just expect so much of Joe Biden right now. I think he has to prove to the Palestinian people that working with Netanyahu is not the way to go, and that he has to get back with the international community and allow the ICC to do its job, He has to condemn and call on the withdrawal of recognition of the settlements as Israel. They are illegal on Palestinian lands. He has to, in my opinion, I mean, we have a long list, but also if he really wants to go back to the status quo, the Obama era status quo, which is not ideal, he still has to move back the embassy to Tel Aviv, which we know he won't, but still, it's really important for the Palestinians. And it's important to listen to the Palestinian people. Enough is enough when it comes to speaking on our behalf. Enough is enough for making decisions on our behalf. It is not okay to consult with non-Palestinians or not consult at all with Palestinians and make decisions on our behalf and for our own self-determination. I mean, people take the Palestinian voice and the Palestinian cause for granted sometimes, and they're just kind of like, it's okay, we can do whatever we want to do. And they have been. But right now is where Palestinian voices need to be heard. Right now is where the Biden administration needs to step out of the norm of listening to the typical Palestinians that have been the talking heads for the past 50 years and listen to the new generation of the Palestinians that are speaking up. Listen to what our demands are. Understand that we are, as Palestinian-Americans here, we are very much involved in the political system. We understand it. We are well aware of how things work. And if you want to build relationships, you have to start from with integrity and hold, show us that you mean business. And we will work with you as long as there is a clear path to understand, to what the Palestinians want. But so far, I mean, yeah, the Biden administration needs to have a space for Palestinians to speak up and needs to really show us that they care, because otherwise they're going to align with yet another Trump-like administration and Netanyahu administration in Israel. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for chatting with me this morning. We appreciate it. Glad to get your perspective.
Welcome.
Thanks for listening to our podcast, a production of mondoweiss.net. Visit our site to subscribe to The Shift, Michael's weekly newsletter. You can also sign up to get new headlines about Israel, Palestine, and related U.S. politics delivered directly to your inbox. Music in this episode is from the excellent Poddington Bear.